Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. The Major 5 qualifiers are over and the bracket has officially been set going into the Major in just a few days' time. Some teams have a rather easier run than they might have been expecting. Some teams with a very difficult time. One of FaZe, Surge or Vegas will finish top 12. Which teams it going to be? Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Plenty to dive into. Firstly, just to mention, of course, after last night's Boston victory over New York in rather controversial fashion, it's got to be said, with the substitute and stuff coming into play, that is now done and dusted. Wardy actually did tie for the 10th highest KD in a debut series in CDL history, but of course it wasn't enough to get the victory yesterday over Boston, and as Octane says, CQ is gone for now. This is the issue. Next season, it's probably going to be back in force again. I don't know if they're really going to be able to do anything about it in the online matches that are probably going to still exist next season. Let's be honest, even though it's obviously a known problem, they could potentially try and resolve it. I'm sure it'll be a discussion in the off-season, but Octane's happy, of course, that online CoD is over for the season, and even Scrappy says a similar thing. What a joke of the online season. What did I just play for the last 7 months? And Insight and Scrappy seem to agree on that one. So, yeah, they've obviously not been fans of online CoD. They go to LAN now, and this is fundamentally where things really matter. Toronto will start in winners. Their bracket is not as easy as it could have been otherwise if maybe they, went 4-1 rather than 3-2, but I don't think it actually matters too much, and we'll look at the schedule here in just a couple of seconds time. Bance even says to Boston, because as we'll see in a second, they play each other again, and Rokkr versus Boston round 1. We know that when they played on LAN, right, at the Rokkr home series, Boston were not kind enough to turn off the loudness equalization. They kept it on, but of course when you go to an actual LAN event in Toronto, it is going to be enforced and mandated by the referees and all this, and therefore it's not going to happen. So maybe that's going to make a different story, right? Because last time they played, Boston won. Awakening said at the time, oh, it didn't make any difference, would have won anyway type thing, even if the sound EQ was off, whereas this time, in fairness, Rokkr are a bit of a better team than they had before, but still, who's favoured to win? That's a spicy match, and one of the best, I think, of the first round. I will say this probably is the final tournament we get to see the branding of the Florida Mutineers. The rumour has it next season they're going to become the Miami Heretics. That's at least what we presently understand, and you'd imagine that involves a change of logo and everything. In fairness, Vegas Legion were meant to change their logo, I think, but that didn't happen because they missed the date or the deadline date or something like that to get it submitted, so they've got the same logo as the Paris Legion days. But yeah, this could be the last time we get to see the Mutineers branding in the league because they're not making champs. Has been confirmed now officially. Even if they win, they won't be able to make it. So these were the standings after all those sets of Major 5 qualifiers. OpTic number 1 by quite some margin, FaZe number 2 at 4-1, and then below that we get Toronto, the 3rd seed, the best map count for a 3-2 team, then Rokkr 12-9 as 3-2, and as I said yesterday, there was a chance, and it came true, that 6 teams tied at 3-2. It's very rare that the 8th team isn't a 2-3 team, and this time Florida go 3-2, but yet they get the 8th seed and play OpTic, which is not ideal for them. But Vegas, the 7th seed, as I kind of said yesterday, it's very possible this could have happened, and indeed it did, because Boston, Subliners, Rokkr and Ultra all positive map counts, not the case for Vegas and the Mutineers. So well, we'll see what that means for the bracket here in a second, but Thieves, Guerrillas, Surge, Ravens down there in losers, and it's a pretty wild bracket really, and pretty wild set of events to think about going into the final event of the season with all 12 teams in attendance. Here then is the bracket. So number 1, number 8 seed, OpTic played Mutineers in the first round. This is a rematch of just a few days ago. We know that Florida can have OpTic's number, and if anything, Florida are looking the deadliest they have right now against all the competition they play than they have for quite some time. I think that OpTic will get the job done. They did it the other day against Florida. It was a 3-0, but it wasn't a complete demolition job. I mean, it was close in all the maps. Now on LAN, maybe things are a bit different. Florida, I wouldn't expect them to win, and maybe they need to bring Davpadie in, as we'll see Vic will say in a second. The second series, Breach Rokkr, and this is where it comes back to the champs race again, and how just important it was that Rokkr have improved substantially, but also that they play a team like Breach first round. This is definitely winnable for Rokkr. I would say they are the marginal favourites here. Rokkr could lose, they could win, but Boston beat them on LAN before when they played the Rokkr home series, and maybe you think, alright, home crowd buff for Rokkr, the loudness equalization buff that Boston love to use, right, that will be turned off for this series, but now Rokkr are a better team, so I'd say they're probably more likely to win. Then though, we get to FaZe Legion, and this is where Vegas is. All the results of yesterday just really conspired against Vegas Legion, because not only did Rokkr get 10 more points on the board, but Boston beating Subliners meant that that it just became even more difficult for Legion to get a better seed, and they now find themselves playing FaZe. They have not beaten FaZe. I'm pretty sure Legion as a franchise hasn't beaten FaZe ever in the entire history of the CDL. That may be incorrect, but it's certainly the case over the last couple of seasons, and it is the one organisation that Legion can basically just never seem to beat. And I don't think Clay's record against his former teammates in Simp and aBeZy is particularly good. So this is, if anything, they could have played OpTic round 1, but in fairness they went game 5 round 11 with OpTic. This might be the worst possible first round draw Vegas could hope to get. And the fact of the matter is, if you win this series, the round 1 series, and get to winners round 2, that's guaranteed top 6. So if Rokkr win, they guarantee themselves top 6, which means even if they lose twice then and go out top 6, Legion need to get top 3 to gain the 20 points they would need to catch up to Rokkr again. So that's where it gets really challenging, and effectively, this is a must-win series for Legion. Because are they going to be able to go to losers and win like 3 or 4 series in a row to get the placement they need? Especially because Rokkr, let's say they even lose to Boston, they play London round 1 in losers, which is as good as a free win as you're going to get. So Rokkr feel like even if they lose to Boston, they should be guaranteed top 8 bare minimum. And top 8 minimum for Rokkr means that Legion have to get top 4 minimum in order to breach the gap. So, and it doesn't feel like Legion are going to be able to get top 4 from the losers run. They could do, but it would be an incredible story. It almost feels like they need to beat FaZe, which is a massive challenge, and even if they beat FaZe, they probably play Ultra next round, so this bottom side of the bracket is stacked. So you've got, obviously, FaZe in here, Ultra here, playing subliners round 1, and this is another thing, like, why subliners went donkey mode a little bit, I've got to say, by putting Wardy in the team, because if they'd have won that series against Boston, I think they would have played Rokkr probably, and they would have been in a better spot at least, or they would have had a better matchup. They now play Toronto in the first round, which is definitely a Toronto-favoured game, so I feel like New York have, if anything, just screwed them over there a little bit, or screwed themselves over, in addition to messing things up, arguably, for Vegas Legion on the other side of the equation, at least somewhat. So the losers bracket is like this, and it does correspond. So the loser of OpTic Mutineers plays Thieves round 1. So again, one of OpTic Mutineers and Thieves will finish top 12. Now, you'd think that Florida were the most likely, but still, Florida against OpTic, always interesting, and Florida beat Thieves online not long ago. So that's really interesting. You'd think Thieves would get through, probably to play Boston or Rokkr, who will take down Ravens, and then the loser of FaZe Legion plays Surge. So again, one of FaZe Legion and Surge will finish top 12. Again, you'd think Surge is the most likely, right? Which is almost where the question arrives to me, that maybe Legion's path to champs here is not to outplace Rokkr as we thought, but it's actually to try and overcome Surge, or potentially Boston, because both of those teams are stuck at 190, but again, Boston or Rokkr should be guaranteed top 8. So they're going to get to 200, which means that Legion would need 40 points or a top 3 finish minimum to gain that margin. So maybe Legion's best chance is to lose to FaZe. Let's say they beat FaZe, ideally, but if they lose to FaZe, they'd play Surge. If they can knock out Surge, top 12, that gives them a goalpost, right? Because they know at that point that 190 is locked in for Surge, and if they can get to 190, I don't know what the tiebreakers would be, but they would know at that point what they were going for, and if they could make a crazy losers run to top 4, top 3, they would be able to breach the gap and make it happen. So maybe that's the way in here, because Rokkr are looking pretty solid right now, and I can't see them finishing any worse than top 8, and probably top 6 I think is definitely on the cards for them at the very minimum. So maybe it's Surge that are actually the most vulnerable over the last couple of days. So pretty crazy set of storylines. Guerrillas at the bottom here, they play the loser of Toronto subliners, so it's going to be a mental bracket, and the fact that Thieves and Surge are starting in losers make things super interesting. But yeah, the events of the last couple of days make it very challenging for Vegas, but it's got to be said as well, OpTic have got to be one of the easiest runs you're going to see on paper. You tell OpTic they can beat Florida and then one of Boston and Rokkr to get to the winners finals and guarantee themselves top 3. Like, that's as good of a bracket as OpTic could realistically hope for, I think. Yes, Rokkr could be a challenger winners round 2, but I mean, still, OpTic should be favoured in all the series they play here regardless, and they are not on the harder side of the bracket. So if there's any tournament for OpTic to win, it's probably this one. The bracket seems to have lined up in their favour. They'll probably play either FaZe or Ultra in the winners finals, but fundamentally, FaZe have been looking the best of any of the teams lately, and we know what OpTic tend to do against FaZe. And as Tim points out, right, if New York had have won against Boston yesterday, which I think they probably would have done if they field their full strength roster. Not guaranteed, but I think they probably would have won that series. They would have played Vegas actually round 1. So New York smoked Vegas 3-0 at the start of Major 4. So this is the thing for New York. It's like, well, maybe they did a nice thing for Wardy. And I know Kismet explained last night during the flank that, they talked about this a while ago, they would do this. It wasn't like this, big strategy from the management team to put Wardy in the shop window to try and sell him next year. That's at least what they say. But frankly, if they'd have won that series, they'd have played Vegas, which you've got to think if you're New York. Would you rather play Vegas round 1 or would you rather play Toronto round 1? Like, I know what answer I would give. I will say, though, on the Vegas side of the story here, if they don't make champs, and it's looking unlikely that they will, but even if they, if they don't make champs here, they will more than likely have lost to teams that make it kind of pointless to even make champs in the first place. Like, if Vegas make champs, and okay, great story, but then just get bodied out top 8, like, okay, it's a nice story, but I don't really care. If they can't beat FaZe and they can't beat Surge this tournament on LAN, then they wouldn't have done anything at champs anyway, so it kind of feels like this is the time to prove themselves. Fundamentally, it's in their hands, right? We'll look at the standings here in a second, but if they win the event, regardless of how well the other teams place, they will, like, even if the top 4 is Vegas, Rokkr, Boston, Surge or something, they will still catch up the required amount of points to overtake the other teams. So technically, at least for Vegas, it is still in their hands, but they would pretty much have to win the event to make that possible, regardless of all the other outcomes. Vickle was obviously joking around here and says, benching myself, get Davpadie back in, because maybe it's not the Florida curse against OpTic, but it's actually the Davpadie curse instead. Even as Stanley says, never needed help anyways. So he's confident they can do it anyway, and we've seen here from FaZe, not like this, may the force be with you, I'm sorry old friend, says counts her Simp the sick joke here, I suppose. Clay's like, we have the high ground, so we'll see, but they might have the high ground, but they don't have the higher seed, which could potentially be a disadvantage for them. So these are the numbers, right, just to make it clear going into champs. It's Boston at now the 6th seed, Surge in 7th, under starting and losers, with a potential top 12 finish. So if Vegas were somehow to win the tournament, they would catch up 35 points guaranteed, because it's 65 for winning and it's 30 for top 4. So they would catch up guaranteed 35 points on one of these other teams. Therefore, they would take a spot at champs. But it does feel to me, looking at this, that maybe their way in is not necessarily to outplace Rokkr, but it's to try and outplace Surge, because they almost have that in their own hands if they were to drop down to losers and play Surge, and then have got to make a massive losers run. But it's going to be really challenging. The way the bracket has worked out is far from ideal for them. OpTic are also getting pretty close to potentially overhauling FaZe, only 15 points behind. If OpTic were to win the event, they would get the number 1 seed, because they certainly hold the head-to-head against FaZe over the course of the season, and is a 15-point gap between 1st and 2nd. So again, the number 1 seed is also in OpTic's hands this event. Just to look at some numbers here before we close out the video, the top and bottom KDs of the entire stage. Hydra topped the lot with a 1.26, Awakening, Scrap up here as well, then Beans with a 1.24, Dashy, Shotzzy appear on here, Cellium as well, Brack, really varied across all the teams actually, even Bance made it with a 1.09. In the bottom teams though, it's somewhat less varied, with 3 of the London guys, Asim, Nasty and Yuli all here. Arcitys, even Fame actually was technically struggling a bit. The worst though goes to Mack with a 0.78, that's pretty rough, but also Sib and Accuracy appearing here as well. Sib with a rather uncharacteristically poor stage from him. Even Octane is appearing, despite all the conversations around the MVP category not that long ago. So sets up a really interesting major, and it's got to be said, the winner of the final major of the season has historically done very well at champs, or has straight up won champs. There's a high correlation between winning this event and winning the big one, because there's no other Call of Duty in that 2-week period. So this is where you want to peak. OpTic right now have the bracket to probably do so and go on to win it, but it's far from easy for all the other teams involved, especially with the way the bracket is lined up. So very much enjoyed to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
I already did, bro. It's just not stop blinking. Everything's plugged in. I unplugged it and plugged it back in.
Yeah. I'm gonna.
Nah, hold on, bro.
You host.
I can't.
Yeah,
Lagging.
Hey. Oh my God, am I on Mars, bro? Am I watching a stream?
But you gotta host, AJ.
I can't. Sorry.
Holy shit.
Yo, Bueno, I think you have to host.
Oh my God, bro. Oh my, actually faded.
I'm sorry, I can't. Bueno's hosting.
Oh my God, I'm sorry, my game. I thought my shield was broken, but I was watching Byron stream, bro.
Hosting.